Welcome back to Data Sources 1, Part 2, Searching for Data. So I'll just remind you, if you haven't seen Part 1 is the overview. These are linked together in a playlist, and we're following the table of contents up at the top right of the page that is linked in the description of this video. And you can consult the overview for other navigation tips. But let's jump right in and let me not talk at length about this part of the session. Searching for data. I find that asking the right questions is very important to understand where you might find data on your topic. Your first step that we often see is someone is looking for data that's an exact match to the specific question that they have. And sometimes these questions can be enormously detailed, but once you stop and think about what you're looking for, you may realize that data is not likely to be available in that format. Data, we don't get inside people's heads that often to track every movement that they have, except in the case of online actions such as social media posts and web tracking and things like that. What you have to ask yourself first to kind of frame your quest for data are the 5 W's. Who would collect this data? If they did so, what level of detail would they be able to collect? Not everything is available at a completely granular level as frequently as you would like it. Why do they collect it? Are they looking for answers to another question, a different question than you might have in mind that might guide how they're collecting and what they're collecting? Of course, when and where are important because data may not be current or matching the geography that you might be interested in. And also, if you are asking questions about something super detailed in some other place, you might start to think about it, well, that is not going to be collected by a publicly available United States source. You might have to go start knocking on doors, figuratively contacting sources, data archives in some other location, right? If your where is a bit different. So to help reflect on that, I'm just going to give 3 quick examples to talk through, right, with some hypothetical researchers. So if we think about business, business students often very interested in the financial performance of a specific company, let alone a basket of companies, right? Let's think about one company. And if you ask who would collect that, the answer in the case of business depends heavily on, is it a public or a private company? So if it's a public company, public companies are regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, which I'm going to pop open links as we go through. Not so much to dig into any particular site, but just to give you a flavor of what's available. When we search for companies and they're trading public stock, those companies are required to file quarterly financials and annual reports, and also report any notices of their activity for the benefit of those trading in the stock. This is the meaning of public in that case. So once this is required, these reports have a standard format. They have standardized data that can be extracted from them that feeds into lots of different other data sources, and we can ask questions about public companies in this way. Private companies are private. They are not required to say much about what they are doing. You may find other business databases that investigate private companies, try to report or estimate their financial information, but that information is not as frequent, detailed, or reliable as public company information. Even within public companies, you're going to find inconsistencies and gaps, right? So there is no requirement for a company to talk about sales of its particular product line, like how many iPads were sold versus iPhones versus, or sales of different models. Often if a company wants to brag about something, they might release some information. They think it makes them look good and increases their value, but they're not required to do that. And that information next year, when it doesn't look so good, might disappear from what they're talking about. So if your goal is to have consistent data comparable over time, you're going to want to think about that. So that's my business example. Again, I don't want to go into super detail about any one of these. Social behavior. This is another thing that, large categories of researchers are interested in. Often they're interested in sensitive topics, topics that may be controversial, right? So if you're interested in the example here, is there a linkage between teenage illegal drug use and long-term health? Who's going to collect that data, right? These are things that people may not want to talk about, and certainly wouldn't want to have regularly tracked for everyone on the internet to download. For this reason, universities have things like institutional review boards to protect and balance the interests of research interest versus privacy interest and versus safeguarding the subjects of research. So what happens in these cases is often there are surveys. The surveys may be a little bit limited because it may be hard to convince people to spend a lot of time and go into all the details of their lives. They can only be conducted by reputable organizations that invest in protecting that privacy and guarantee some long-term protection. So we'll talk a little bit later in section 4 about restricted data. Often this data is in a restricted category for that reason. One classic example is the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health, and I'm just noticing we're in April 2025, we have seen that a number of data sources are being affected by the Trump administration's actions, and there's a little notice here that the repository is under review. I wonder what that actually entails in this case. But this study, as they say, has started in 94, 95 and tracked 20,000 adolescents. Every few years they go back and ask those same people questions about how's their life going, and you can see that this has pretty sensitive stuff, right? It's got biological data, including like their blood and genetic analysis and information about their behavior, their families. So people want to ask these questions about what makes someone successful as an adult. How does their upbringing and development influence that? these are very interesting questions, but the people involved are important, right? And so therefore, when you go to there are public use data sets that you can study this, but the very detailed data is restricted because they want the researcher using it to vouch for the fact that they're going to protect the data. They are going to not misuse it. They're not going to use it to identify people because the data could be very detailed, right? And so also you may have an interest in a question that there just isn't any funder or agency kind of scaled up to do that work. As I've alluded to, right, political changes can alter that over time as well, right? We see studies of gender issues, sexual behavior issues that are very time dependent in terms of how those topics are treated. So that influences things. And a final quick example, if we look at something just like health statistics, health is one of those areas that is sort of pure biological health outcomes are tracked in somewhat more detail than behavioral things. And if you think about statistics for something like cancer versus something like obesity, they're a little bit different, right? So if someone gets a cancer diagnosis, right, they are interacting with the health system, and they often will be going to the hospital for treatment. They become an official entry into the system when something like that happens. And therefore the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, has one jumping off point for them is the CDC Wonder data set. We'll revisit this a little bit later. But, you know, the source of death or cause of death is something that is mentioned on death certificates. These things are tracked in detail, right? So we can actually get pretty reliable statistics on an identifiable disease like cancer. Something like obesity, which obviously has great health impacts, is a little bit different, right? Because we don't track every person out there to know, you know, what's your weight today, right? We have apps that are doing that, and one of the areas of interest is pulling in some of this more detailed data that people are providing, but you know, it's just not the same thing. We're not getting. If your data question is what is the current weight of every person in the United States, you have to recognize you're not going to get that exact answer, but you will find surveys where people are trying to get at that kind of thing, or something like this, the Healthy Eating and Active Living Survey. It turns out that the obesity statistics in the CDC are based on something called the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System. And so you read about this, you can see that it is a telephone survey. And if you dig a little bit into the questionnaires, you'll see the weight. You know, they ask people, what is your weight? And it's a self-reported telephone survey. So ask yourself, right, we might clearly be able to identify trends over time. If people are saying they weigh more now than they did 10 years ago, that is of interest. You know, that's something that could be viewed as reliable. If we take a telephone survey of self-reported weight, we have to, I guess there's a pun intended here, take it with a grain of salt, because we shouldn't treat that as that's the actual current weight of of people. It's probably not going to be as precise as another data set that was taken from the scales in the doctor's office, right, when patients are checking in. However, we don't get access to people who don't enter the health system except by means of these surveys. So these are all factors. I hope those kind of case studies let you, and I lost my window there, so I am going to go back in here into the dark mode, and that those case studies help you think a little bit about how you would approach different kinds of data needs. And then finally, I'm going to talk briefly about strategies of identifying data. The sources that I'm going to give you in the upcoming parts are some of the biggies, right? Some of the highlights where you might want to start searching for data. But with that knowledge, you want to start with major sources, but also think about the kind of data you need. If you're not finding something as specific as you like, take a step back and frame the search more generally, right? So if we, in the case of cancer, right, we might not have, very detailed statistics on like exactly where the cancer occurred in the body outside of major organs, like did it happen in the left side of the body versus the right side of the body. That might not be tracked, but you can take a step back, be a little bit more general, and try to adapt that. Often in library discussions, we like to let people know about the special sources that we have in the libraries. I'm going to talk about that in part 3. But general internet searches are also good, especially just for finding out about, discovering potential sources. A major source might be just mentioned in a news release, in a discussion somewhere, and at least you can build up your knowledge of the names of those sources and then figure out how to track them down. You might also see things like a great study from 10 or 20 years ago, from a source that you just can't find anymore. And just be aware that there are changes over time. Data sources can be discontinued. Again, we're seeing this play out in real time. Data sources can change names or even change the approach of like what they're covering. As you go back in time, you may find underrepresented, minoritized groups have not received enough coverage, where the issues that affect them have not been analyzed. So you may need extra effort to uncover those data sources. And in section 5, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the sources that you can use for that. And if you're doing your own original research, in a sense, you may be frustrated if you're not finding data on that topic. But if you think about that, that is a sign that your research question is original, in a sense. You may be looking at something that others have not been able to analyze before, but then you can go to the literature, the research articles for your field, which you can identify, major databases that cover different academic disciplines. Look for articles. If no one in the past has been able to research your topic from an official data source, all of these studies are individual researchers going out and doing their own surveys. That might be a strong signal that there isn't an official source, original research is needed, or on the other hand, you may find that the other researchers on the topic have all tapped into some source. It may not be a quickly available public internet available source, but they might all be contacting some agency and getting permission to use data from them. This often happens for the more detailed sort of inside administrative data, which we'll again talk about a little bit in section 4 with the restricted data. So I hope this segment has given you something to think about in terms of just how you approach looking for data. Creativity, persistence, and patience are all things that are valuable qualities when you are looking for data to serve a kind of original research need. And sometimes you'll get lucky and find some gems. Sometimes you'll be able to craft existing data sources into something more usable for you. And again, hopefully this gives you a little bit of background to think about that. So that's the end of this section. I will see you in section 3 about sources.